Driver that spots a bear cub in the road notices one alarming detail. If you've ever been to a state park, a national park, or really any nature preserve, then you know there are often signs scattered throughout the trails urging visitors not to feed or interact with the wildlife. It's often best to let wild animals do their thing in peace, without blasphemous human interference. Though this is true in most cases, sometimes vulnerable wild animals could use a helping hand. Well, upon spotting a family of black bears struggling to cross the road safely, a responsible New Hampshire resident pulled over and called the police for assistance. But when State Trooper Thomas Owens arrived to the scene, he soon realized he had a bigger predicament to handle than he previously thought.
Before we begin, make sure you smash that like button, subscribe to our channel, and click the notification bell for more amazing videos.
On the rural, backcountry roads of Carroll, New Hampshire, it's not uncommon to witness critters crossing the street among the SUV and pickup trucks. And although that's usually a no-fuss occurrence, sometimes animals lose their bearings. The town of Carroll Police Department has warned its residents, especially while driving, to beware of moose, deer, and other woodsy wildlife running through the streets. Though it's common, this particular incident is anything but. When a Carroll resident was driving along a quiet road near Bretton Woods Ski Resort, a family of black bears, led by a fierce mama bear, stopped the driver in his tire tracks. Noticing that the mama bear was hesitant for some reason, he immediately called the police, hoping that wildlife experts could shed some light on a situation that didn't make a ton of sense to him. State Trooper Thomas Owens arrived to clear the road and save the day. Considering baby bears need to stick by their mother's side for approximately 1.5 years before leaving the nest, Thomas was a bit concerned that one of the 4 babies couldn't keep up. Thomas watched, noticing that the runt of the litter, so to speak, seemed unsure, frightened, and paralyzed in the middle of the road. Because of how the circle of life tends to work, Thomas was worried for this cub's future. Considering the mama bear halted in the middle of the road, pacing back and forth, waiting for her weakest little one to catch up to the group, she seemed to have an inkling that this baby might not be fit enough to carry on. Sadly, mothers often have to move on in situations such as these, so as not to put the rest of the cubs at risk. According to the North American Bear Center, bear litters consisting of more than 3 are often weaker and stand less of a chance at surviving. Thomas watched the mama bear and her 4 babies dawdle in the street as he directed traffic around them. In his head, the state trooper was rooting for the feeble little one, praying that he'd catch up. It soon became clear that additional help was needed. It's quite the majestic experience to witness a family of wild black bears crawling around mere feet from you, an experience that begs for a photo shoot, so the mama bear may have felt threatened by the overwhelming amount of people gawking at them. Considering black bears would often rather resort to flight than fight, as opposed to the aggressive grizzly bear, the crowd of mesmerized onlookers probably scared her off, leaving her unable to protect her weakest. She had to move on with her 3 strong cubs. The knight in shining armor saw that the runt was left behind and decided it was time to call for backup. Thomas contacted Fish and Wildlife Services in order to have a professional come and transport the weak cub. Authorities soon made an interesting connection. Thankfully, the frail cub was immediately brought to safety at a rehabilitation center in Lyme. But the police realized something oddly familiar about the incident, as something almost identical happened in Carroll just 24 hours prior. Another officer rescued a different Carroll bear cub just the day before. The town of Carroll Police Department officers pondered if perhaps these 2 bear cubs were from the same litter. Though a litter of 4 is already somewhat rare, could it have been a litter of 5? The North American Bear Center reports that mother bears usually have just 1 or 2 babies in her first litter, so having 5 was nearly unbelievable. After the police department did some investigating, it was confirmed that these 2 isolated cubs were from the same litter. This leaves her with 3 other very healthy cubs that she can now focus on and take care of, the department stated regarding the mama bear. To clarify, this mama did all that she could, even managing to keep all 5 of them warm and safe in the den since January. She did well. But everyone needs a little help every now and again, even the fiercest of mama black bears. Both cubs were taken to rehab centers in hopes that, with the help of veterinarians and modern medicine, they'd eventually grow strong enough to return to the wild and become independent. Please use this as a reminder to keep bears wild and not feed them human food or from your vehicle, even if they are adorable, state police urged, also clarifying that the black bears were handled by professionals and that the public should never approach wild animals. It's heartwarming to know that these fragile cubs weren't left for dead, as bleak as that sounds, and that they're now under great care. These 2 4-legged babies needed human assistance, which isn't a common occurrence, but it's not unheard of. Rescuing babies may not sound so scary, but imagine rescuing an adult bear. It's not often that wild animals wander into our personal space. They typically want to avoid us at all costs. But on the rare occasion that they do, they can get into some serious trouble. Bears, for example, aren't exactly the kind of animal you'd consider helpless. Still, they're curious, and that can sometimes leave them between a rock and a hard place. This was no more evident than the case of one bear in Alligator Point on St. James Island in Florida. The 375-pound black bear had been sniffing around the neighborhood when he wandered into a home. Wildlife conservation officers were called to sedate him and safely relocate him to the wild. But moments after he was shot with a tranquilizer, things started to go wrong. It may sound harsh to shoot an animal, even by strictly non-lethal means, but the wildlife officers had no choice. As much as the bear wanted nothing more than to mind his own business, he would have encountered a human soon enough. Even though using a tranquilizer was the humane option to ensure the bear and area residents stayed safe, there were no guarantees the process would go the way they planned it. Of course, that plan quickly backfired. Instead of the dart sedating him, it immediately sent the bear into a panic. The wildlife officers readied themselves for the worst, but they didn't realize just how bad things were about to get. The large bear, who must have been terrified by the officers chasing him, made a beeline toward the nearby water, and he began swimming out as far as he could. Unfortunately, that was when the sedative started to kick in. The drowsy bear clearly couldn't keep himself afloat, and he began to drown. Adam Morick, a biologist with the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission, knew that he had to act quickly. Without hesitating, the fearless and determined Adam dove into the water and swam toward the huge bear. Most people couldn't imagine doing something quite so brave, but to him, it made perfect sense, at least in the moment. It was a spur-of-the-moment decision. I had a lot of adrenaline pumping when I saw the bear in the water, Adam later said of the experience. Thank goodness for that adrenaline. Otherwise, he would have known how dangerous it truly was. What if the bear attacked him? Adam didn't have time to think twice. He grabbed the enormous bear with both hands and wrapped his arms around his neck. Then he started to kick toward shallow water where the other wildlife officers were waiting. The bear wasn't entirely asleep, and he was understandably distressed. He frantically tried to climb on top of Adam in an effort to stay afloat, but he was losing the ability to move his legs. Despite his stressful and incredibly risky mission, Adam stayed as calm as he could as he approached more shallow water. He grabbed the bear by the scruff of his neck and carefully led him toward the rescue boat. Thankfully, Adam was able to pull the powerful predator roughly 25 yards toward dry land. Moving the bear might have seemed relatively easy in the water, but it was a different story on the shore. The unusual pair finally made it to the rest of the rescue team in one piece. Though the bear was sedated, he could have lunged at Adam or swiped at him with his claws at any moment. Incredibly, Adam suffered only one scratch during the entire ordeal. Other than that, he was perfectly fine. Who would have known that he'd come out of this risky mission relatively unscathed? Adam's colleagues stepped in to help the exhausted man and beast collect their bearings. It was going to take a lot of people and a lot of bravery along the way, much like anyone in this type of situation. The team drove a large tractor toward the water's edge to transport the groggy bear back to his home in Osceola National Forest. There was no way they would have been able to carry a 375-pound animal without a little help. Thankfully, the bear didn't suffer any injuries after his wild jaunt in the water. It was safe to say that he probably wouldn't go anywhere near water for a while following this experience. Most importantly, this massive bear was safe and back in a habitat that suited him best. Hopefully by now, he's learned to avoid wandering into residential neighborhoods, but for some bears, a zoo is the safest place for them. In some cases, zoos are beneficial for the animals that live there as they provide stable environments free of predators. For endangered animals, this kind of controlled environment can even lead to regrowth of dwindling populations. Yet zoos remain a controversial subject. In places without animal regulations, the inhabitants may suffer serious abuse in environments ill-fitted to meet their complex needs. But perhaps the biggest qualm against zoos is the actual nature of the zoos themselves. By keeping wild animals confined in small spaces for the amusement of guests, zookeepers deprive them of their freedom, the very thing that makes them so remarkable. But with no sign of this ethical gray area surrounding zoos clearing up anytime soon, some try to meet in the middle and mediate the controversy. In fact, one Washington zoo has made a name for itself by doing just that. At the Olympic Game Farm in Sequim, WA, visitors can get up close and personal with a variety of animals in their natural habitats. As guests drive through the preserve, non-predatory animals will approach, allowing you to feed, photograph, and even pet them. For those animals that get a little too playful with visitors, a small fence separates them from the road, allowing guests to observe them from a distance. Despite these precautions, however, some of the residents still interact with admirers. One YouTuber learned this firsthand as he and his companion made their way through the preserve. Taking time to visit each enclosure, they took a particular interest in the fenced-off area holding a group of Kodiak bears. As one of the largest living species of bear, these enormous furballs are quite the sight, which is likely what drew the pair to their enclosure in the first place. But as they made their way along the edge of the exhibit, they spotted something that made their jaws drop. It was the biggest bear they'd ever seen. The gigantic Kodiak was seated right on the other side of the enclosure's fence, though with its massive size it easily could have climbed over. Still, that didn't stop the man and his companion from pulling up to take a closer look. From the smile on the passenger's face, it was clear the pair was more excited by the bear than scared of it. So, instead of merely observing the wild animal and heading on their way, they decided to share some good vibes with their new furry friend. Reaching out the window, the woman began waving at the enormous creature, hoping the bear would somehow understand the gesture. As it turns out, it did, though the woman surely never expected what came next. For a moment, the animal just sat there, watching blankly as the woman flapped her hand from the safety of her vehicle just a few yards away. Was the bear simply watching the strange sight out of curiosity, or was he quietly calculating his next move? Well, they got their answer, as without warning, the bear fell back on its haunches and reared into the air. The Kodiak looked primed for an attack, but as the passenger quickly pulled her arm back into their vehicle, the bear caught both of them, completely by surprise. With a quick flick of the wrist, the bear returned the wave with one of its own, sending the two riders off with huge smiles on their faces and one incredible memory. But did the bear really know what it was doing? Bears are famously social creatures and are known to habituate with humans much as they do with their own kind. By this logic, it certainly isn't far-fetched to think that the bear meant the wave as a gesture of passivity or welcoming. On the other hand, most of the animals at the Olympic Game Farm are regularly hand-fed loaves of wheat bread by humans. By mimicking Humphrey 815's passenger, the bear may have seen this as a way to earn food as a reward. Whatever the reason, people just can't enough of the adorable waving bear, as the video of the interaction has been viewed by almost 20 million users. And believe it or not, the other bears at the preserve have begun to follow suit. Now, guests who wave at any of the bears at the Olympic Game Farm can expect a friendly wave back, at the price of a piece of bread, of course. With their bellies full and all this attention, it's no wonder these bears look so happy. Amazingly, bears are also known to form interspecies relationships with animals besides humans. In fact, some of these creatures have even taken to bonding with animals a fraction of their size. An example of this occurred just recently at the Berlin Zoo, where employees were shocked and confused when they saw a small cat roaming the enclosed home of an Asiatic bear named Mauschen. Mauschen was one of the most popular animals at the Berlin Zoo. Her size and strength were well known among staff and visitors alike. The cat was first seen early one morning by an employee while they were making sure Mauschen had enough food. They were startled when they saw the cat inside sitting on one of the tree branches. Once Mauschen the bear noticed the little cat in her domain, things quickly changed. As Mauschen began to slowly approach her, the tiny feline jumped down onto the ground. To everyone's surprise, Mauschen was instantly smitten with her small new friend, who zoo staff decided to name Muschai, and the two quickly became inseparable. However, that wasn't the strangest part. In 2007, the Berlin Zoo decided to expand Mauschen's enclosure. This meant that Mauschen and Muschai needed to be separated while construction was happening, which posed quite an odd reaction between the two. Mauschen and Muschai actually became visibly upset by the new arrangement. Zoo workers felt terrible keeping these new pals apart. Muschai would even sit outside Mauschen's cage and cry all night. Finally, after the renovations on Mauschen's new enclosure were complete, the two animals were reunited. Their rekindled friendship quickly began to draw some serious attention. Visitors from everywhere came to watch the unique relationship between the unlikely pair develop. But where did Muschai even come from in the first place? The origin of Muschai was unknown, but more mysterious was the reason behind her attraction to Mauschen. Workers said it felt as though the two were meant to meet. Mauschen and Muschai are a reminder that, despite our differences, friendships can bloom anywhere. But they're actually not the only unlikely zoo pair around. Oddly enough, the friendship that formed at the Berlin Zoo wasn't the first time a massive bear befriended a teeny feline. The same thing happened at the Folsom City Zoo Sanctuary in California. A black cat, whom workers named Little Bear, suddenly appeared in the zoo's bear enclosure. Of course, people were immediately worried for the cat's well-being, but the two species seemed to actually enjoy each other's company. The cat would sneak in every morning and eat the food the zoo workers left out for the massive bears. When they realized what she was doing, they started leaving cat food for her as well. Jill Faust, the senior lead zookeeper at Folsom City Zoo, had never seen anything like it before in her life. Although the pair was highly unusual, Jill wanted her workers to foster the relationship as best they could. Little Bear took a particular interest in one of the zoo's largest animals, a 550-pound black bear named Sequoia. Though she had never been very aggressive, the workers still had to look out for the cat's safety. One of the benefits of having Little Bear around was that she actually increased foot traffic at the sanctuary. People came from all over to witness the unusual, but adorable, friendship the two animals formed. For most of the day, Little Bear simply reclined in the shade provided by the enclosure's trees, watching as her pal Sequoia and the other bears went about their business. It was like she was one of them. Little Bear loved all the attention she got from visitors. She felt as comfortable at the zoo as any other animal would, despite hanging around creatures so large. From day one, Little Bear acted as if she belonged right there in the bear's enclosure. Like Muschai and Mauschen, this feline ursine pair was almost too adorable to handle. These friends have already gotten through so much. There's no doubt their bond will continue to strengthen as time goes by. It's incredible to witness just how two completely different creatures can make such a connection, and it's not even just bears. In November 2016, a baby southern white rhino, who would come to be known as Nandy, faced an impossible situation. Her mother had been killed by poachers, and at just 2 months old, she was completely alone and unable to fend for herself. Given the circumstances, Nandi struggled to survive. She didn't have a mother to show her what to eat, so the desperate baby rhino filled her belly on sand. Pending a miracle, it was clear she wouldn't be long for the world. But Nandi fought long enough, and eventually, that miracle came. Rescuers came across the severely dehydrated rhino in the nick of time and rushed her to the Rhino Orphanage, a Wild Heart Wildlife Foundation-supported nonprofit company in South Africa. At the orphanage, Nandi was given milk under the watchful eye of her caretaker, Jamie Trainer. Charged with her well-being, Jamie ensured the rhino received all she needed. She even slept alongside the rhino at night. But would it be enough? After all, Nandi had been through a lot, and all that sand in her belly posed serious health risks. Nevertheless, if she were going to recover, the Rhino Orphanage was her best chance. Day by day, thanks to Jamie and the orphanage's dedicated efforts, Nandi's vitals improved. She started eating solid food, not sand! And she was drinking plenty of water. She even made a few friends. Her first friend, of course, was Jamie herself. Every day, the caretaker took the little white rhino on a walk, so the two had plenty of time to bond. But their relationship was a bit more playful, too. For example, Nandi loved chasing Jamie around the grounds. She's a little rhino with a big attitude and has given Jamie many bruises already from playing, a Wild Heart Wildlife Foundation spokesman said. But Jamie wasn't the only friend the rhino loved to play with. While Jamie may have been dubbed the Rhino Whisperer, she actually rescued and cared for another species of animal too, and it was one that she would soon introduce to Nandi. Jamie had rescued Mewy the cat when he was just a few weeks old. The cat followed her wherever Jamie went around the Rhino Orphanage, so she was bound to bump into Nandi sooner or later. But would they get along? Sure enough, during her time spent recovering, Nandi came face to face with Mewy, and it didn't take long for her to find out she had a few interests in common with the handsome feline. They get along pretty well because they both love to go for walks. Jamie said, Mewy needs to be carried back from the walks because he gets too tired. But that was all right, because then the two could participate in another favorite activity. Nandi and Mewy bonded over a mutual adoration for naps. But since rhinos typically only sleep about 8 hours per day compared to a cat's 12, Mewy had to clock in his additional hours on the side. With her new friends by her side, Nandi took massive strides towards her recovery. In fact, with her general demeanor, psychology, and health trending upwards, caretakers hoped she might be able to someday return to the wild. But then, there was a hiccup. In February 2017, just a few months after Nandi's initial rescue, poachers raided the Rhino Orphanage. They were hunting for valuable ivory tusks, and they were willing to kill to get them. As a result, Nandi was in serious danger. Thankfully, Nandi survived the poacher attack, but Jamie knew she wouldn't be safe at the Rhino Orphanage anymore. Complicating matters was that the orphaned rhino still wasn't ready to be released into the wild just yet. Authorities mulled over what to do with her. The orphanage opted to transfer Nandi, as well as another rhino named Storm, to a more secure facility called Zululand Rhino Orphanage. In March 2017, Jamie and Mewy officially said goodbye to their friend Nandi. Though saying goodbye was sad, it was a wise decision, and thanks to Jamie's great care and Mewy's friendship, in May 2018, the Zululand Rhino Orphanage found Nandi fit enough to return to the wild. On the day she was released, the orphaned white rhino, along with her newest friend, Storm, was nervous to leave the sheltered facility. They spent multiple days standing at the gate, unwilling to venture out into the wild on their own. Eventually, though, she and Storm stepped out of the fenced-in orphanage, and for the first time in their lives, they were completely free. And it was all thanks to the friends they'd made along the way. Rhinos aren't often seen as playful animals, but then again, you haven't seen Nandi yet. Just watch her having the time of her life as she plays with Jamie. This sure was a rhino that couldn't be kept down for long.